And I know some of you are having a difficult time seeing in the back. We can get these in a kind of a larger poster size for everybody. They are all online. So if you're interested in those, we can get those to you.
What about the 18-year-olds?
What do you mean, what about them?
That are still in the system.
Yes.
It just goes up to 17.
No, it goes, the red, good question. The red are 14 to 19-year-olds. And then those with the blue legs are the 16 and 17-year-olds. And that's really just to show our highest number of young people right now are those 16 and 17-year-olds. So great question, thank you. Okay, so here we have youth age 14 and older in 2010 who left the system. These are the young people who were guardianshipped, the number of adoptions, and then the number of young people who aged out. So as we're looking at permanency, we focused on where the young people were going. Placement setting, and this is something to be thinking about as we do our presentations about the legislation. You'll see here with the houses, these are our family-based settings for our older youth. These are places like adoptive, pre-adoptive homes, relatives known, relative or known to child placements, or non-relative foster homes. Again, red is 16 and 17-year-olds, blue is 14 to 19. Then these here in the building are the young people in group homes or institution-based settings. And so you see with our older youth, we have a significant amount of the 14 to 19-year-olds living in those placements. Okay, permanency objectives, also known as case plan goals. Blue here is going to be your 0 to 13, so your younger state wards, and then your red the red is 14 to 19-year-olds. And this just goes through all of the case plan goals. So adoption, guardianship, independent living, no permanency objective found, reunification, and then there's a little one with self-sufficiency with disability. So you can see with the young people, 0 to 13, they have, there's quite a few with reunification goals. I'm trying to think of the other ones. Oh, obviously the independent living with the 14 to 19-year-olds is higher, and then for the little ones. Okay, this one I struggled through yesterday because I forgot what it was all about. But this one here, these are for the young entry age versus those who are aging out. And you'll see in a second why this is pretty significant. The blue is entries at age 14 or older when they enter care. So these are all the young people who are 14 or older entering the system right now. The red are those who age out when they enter after 14. So showing that when young people enter foster care after the age 14, that they are more likely to age out of the system. Okay. This here is trend data, and we felt it was important. This is not just a Nebraska trend, this is also a national trend. We see the number of exits and the number of state wards going down, which is really wonderful as a state and as a country. However, the number of young people who are aging out of the foster care system is continuously going up and rising. And again, this is national. Okay, so that really is just to kind of give a baseline as we talk about older youth and transition planning. Questions? Okay, some of you may have met this young man. This is Ricardo. All of our slides and everything that we do is with the young people, and he is one of our young men involved in Omaha. All right. Okay, so first we're going to look at fostering connections to success. I'm not going to call it the full name every time, but I'm just going to lovingly call it fostering connections. This was passed on October 7th, 2008, and it really is known as the biggest, most significant piece of federal legislation for foster care since the Chafee Act, so in the last 10 years. Fostering connections focus on 6 priority areas. Support for kinship care and family connections, support for older youth, which we're going to focus on in my presentation, coordinated health services, improved educational stability and opportunities, incentives and assistance for adoption, and direct access to federal resources for Indian tribes. So, specific to transition planning. So the provisions specific to transition planning within fostering connections are during the 90-day period before a youth leaves foster care at 18, 19, 20, or 21, so here in Nebraska, 19, a transition plan must be developed. The plan must be individual to the young person and developed with the young person. You'll hear as I talk about what the young people are talking about how significant that piece is. And then among issues to be addressed are specific options on housing, health insurance, education, local opportunities for mentors, and workforce supports and employment services. Those are the provisions specifically on the transition planning within Fostering Connections to Success Act. This is Bree. Okay, so LB 177. LB 177 became state law this May, and the young people were really excited to see this piece of focus and expansion and looking at how it's going to be implemented here in Nebraska. This was intended to assist DHHS in implementing 3 of the specific requirements within Fostering Connections here in Nebraska. So those 3 specific requirements that Nebraska focused on with this legislation was using due diligence to notify adult relatives within 30 days. Hello. Okay, so using due diligence to notify adult relatives within 30 days when a child is removed from their parental custody, making reasonable efforts to support or efforts to place siblings together unless doing so is contrary to their safety or well-being, or provide for sibling time if placement together is not possible. And then the one that we'll be focusing on is creating transition plans for children aging out of foster care. All right, are we in our after lunch lull? Okay, so you saw just one slide with Fostering Connections specific to the transition planning. Here we have quite a few more, which is good that we go into more detail. So because I don't ever want to misspeak, this is the language that was pulled. And so I'm gonna read a lot of these and then I'll go into where I actually am talking a little bit more in a little bit. But I wanna make sure that I'm stating things correctly. So when a child is placed in foster care, turns 16 years of age or enters foster care and is at least 16 years of age, a written independent living transition proposal shall be developed by DHHS at the direction and involvement of the child to prepare for the transition from foster care to adulthood. This transition proposal should be personalized based on the child's needs, and that's really significant. The transition proposal shall include but not be limited to, which is always good for us to keep in mind that we don't have to follow just these specific things, but really what is for the best for the child or for this young person. The following pieces need to, though, be included: education, employment services and other workforce supports, health and healthcare coverage, financial assistance, including education on credit card financing, banking and other services, housing, relationship development, and adult services if the needs assessment indicates that the child is reasonably likely to need or be eligible for services or other supports from the adult system. Those of you who were at the PIP meeting on Wednesday, we had a big discussion about how important that is, that we're having that conversation about when the young people are going from our child welfare system and then are going to end up needing that support in the adult system and what that transition looks like and what needs done before they age out. All right. So, the transition proposal shall be developed and frequently reviewed by the department in collaboration with the child's team. The transition team shall be comprised of the child's caseworker, the child's guardian ad litem, individuals selected by the child, and individuals who have knowledge of services available to the child. I love that the child is the first one listed. They really are the most important piece of the team. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. Okay, the transition proposal shall be considered a working document and shall be at the least updated and reviewed at every permanency or review hearing by the court. And that is very significant, that we make sure that it is reviewed and updated regularly. The final transition proposal prior to the child leaving foster care shall specifically identify how the needs for housing will be addressed. Again, I don't know if I need to say this, but I will. We know nationally right now between 46 and 52% of young people who age out of the system will be homeless at one time or multiple times. So it's incredibly significant that the need for housing will be addressed. Okay. If the child is interested in pursuing higher education, the transition proposal shall provide for the process in applying for any applicable state, federal, or private aid. And then on or before the date the child reaches 19 years of age, the department shall provide the child a certified copy of the child's birth certificate and facilitate securing a federal Social Security card when the child is eligible for such a card. The young people were really excited to see that in there. Often that's something that they find when they leave care that they don't often have. So. And then the last is that all fees associated with securing the copies will be waived by the state. Yes?
My question is, how are you doing with that? And I enjoyed the conference that you put on. And I heard young people saying that they wanted a sense of normalcy too, about being able to spend the night with family, do those kinds of things. Kids want to take driver's ed, they want to get driver's licenses. How are you doing following this law? Do you have outcomes for Nebraska's successes in this? And how are our kids doing as they emancipate from their
That was a lot. Okay. I think this was passed in May, and we have to remember that. And I think that everybody is kind of getting on board and working at what they can do to do that. I am not a direct service provider, so I will not be the one to answer how you're doing with that. But I think that's a conversation that communities and teams need to be having. So how are young people faring? We do have those kind of data and information, and we know that this is a struggle, and this is why we continue to talk about it, and this is why we have this type of legislation, because we need to be focusing on it. So I don't know if I can directly answer that question for you, but it's the reason we're having this presentation is because it's a continuous need.
Do we have, so there is like for instance, a state shaping report that goes into the federal government each year on the $80 that Nebraska receives. What does it say that our kids are getting? I think that would be a good outcome to see over the last, since 1988. I'm just being interested to see how we have been faring.
Yeah, and I don't write the Chafee report, but I would encourage you to get a hold of that and to look into it and to ask those questions. I don't have the answer for that.
I can just say within the last 3 months, I know of 3 kids who have been told by the department that either they or the foster parent had to pay for the birth certificate costs. That was in the last 3 months.
And again, I'll go back to this is new legislation that this was passed in May. So what we're hoping from this is an education piece for everybody. And so now when those things happen, she said she knows of foster families and young people who've had to pay for those documents, where I just said that within this legislation the fee is now waived. That now we're educating everybody to go back and say no, that needs to be waived and that the process needs to be figured out for being able to do that. So. Anybody else? Okay, this is Haley. All right, so what are we hearing from young people in addition to and with Fostering Connections and then LB 177? This is the part that I like the most. Most of you know me, I'm a program person, not a policy person. Okay, so what are young people saying? It doesn't start at 16. It starts when they enter the system. And it should be happening at home, we know that. But that preparation and that planning for them to be an adult needs to happen from the very beginning. I know I have a 3.5-year-old. She plans to be a princess husker. And so we're talking about what that's going to look like and what she needs to do to get there, and what are other opportunities for her in life. And so that conversation, you all know if you have children or nieces or nephews or whomever, or even yourselves, that talking about what your life was going to look like when you moved out of mom and dad's house really started much earlier than 16 or 90 days before you left their home. And that type of planning and preparation happened in a very natural way. You didn't sit down with your parents and go through a class in PowerPoints and slides or have a workbook, maybe sometimes. But how we learned was watching our parents in the grocery store. How we learned was walking into a bank and feeling comfortable walking into a bank with our parents. It was a very natural, it was conversations we had driving places in the car. And so young people are saying we want those opportunities to build natural skills as well, and to have people talk to us about what's going to happen, and not just at meetings, like a team meeting or things like that, but how are we building it into in a natural way. Hold on with that. When I was asked to do this presentation, I sent out an email to all of my staff and our young people and said, all right, I'm not the expert, but you all are in it right now. And so what are some things that you want to make sure that I communicate to everybody in the room? And so I have some notes from them I want to make sure to cover. I talked about this a little bit, and both Fostering Connections and LB 177 touched on this, and we really believe that this is the most important part, is that the young people are at those transition planning meetings, that those young people are leading their transition planning and what's going to happen with them once they age out. In your packet, there's a piece, and I'm not going to pull it out of mine, but it has some young people on the front, and it's called Foster Club's Toolkit. That was created by young people who have aged out of the system. Nationally, all of those young people on there are alumni, and they created that in a very youth-driven way. It's for the young people to have and to really help them to create their own plans and to think through what their life is going to look like when foster care is done and what they're going to do. And it's a really wonderful empowerment tool for the young people to be leading that themselves, because once we're all done, they're there, left, picking up the pieces and figuring it out on their own anyway. So why not support them in thinking through and asking themselves those tough questions before they get out there on their own? And another incredibly important piece, and the LB 177 talked about and touched on this, with the relationship piece needs to be talked about. But permanency. What we're hearing from young people is that we know we're 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, but we still want to know that we have family. We still want to know that somebody's fighting for us to have healthy relationships with people and teaching us how to do that. And so as you're talking about what educational resources and what workforce resources and all of those different things, make sure you're also still talking about who is going to be my lifelong support once the system is done, and once my caseworker or my CASA volunteer, or once those people are done in my life. Help me have that conversation and make sure that I'm going to have people in my life to help me figure these things out. We've had some really interesting conversations as young people who have aged out of the system, and what was kind of the most important thing that's kind of helped us get through. And we've had some cool conversations about, I Googled how to, boil an egg, or I Googled how to do certain things, and I can YouTube how to do anything now. But what nobody ever talked to me about was, how do I ask somebody to help me? How do I reach out and say, I'm really struggling right now, and I just need you to love me? And how do I be okay with being loved? And so that's kind of a conversation, a big conversation that the young people and the older youth are having right now, is to teach us how to have and be in relationships. Let me make sure I didn't forget anything else they... Oh, and a lot of people have heard me say this a million times, but please don't call it independent living. Young people, when they hear independent living, they think I'm going to have to be out there on my own, and I'm going to have to do this by myself. And so it's a piece of that permanency, and knowing that you don't have to do it by yourself. Who are your resources and your support to help you through after you age out of the system? And when you looked at the data, when we were kind of talking about where our youth are living, you saw the significant amount of young people who are living in institutions or congregate care. And so 2 things to be thinking about right there is how are they learning to be in relationships and to learn from family dynamics and to prepare like a family and have those lifelong relationships if they're living in those places. And then what are the conversations that need to happen? And so, again, the importance of looking at where our young people are right now and then how we're going to move forward. With that said, let's make sure I get through all my slides. This slide was just included to show, this is data here in Nebraska. This is actually from Omaha. This is showing that young people who say they have a permanent supportive person in their life have better outcomes as far as housing, education, and healthcare than young people who say they don't have a support system. So we just included that again to show the importance of having the conversation about who are going to be your people once you age out of the system and how important that is to transition planning. All right. So I just included some resources. Fosteringconnections.org is a really awesome resource for that piece of legislation. The transition toolkit, we only include a little summary of that for everybody because we didn't want to kill about 10 trees because it's huge, but it's also online, which is super cool for the young people. The National Resource Center for Youth Development has some pretty great concepts for transition planning. And then this here, these youth circles, we have a site in Hawaii, and they have done a really amazing cultural-based transition planning that the youth actually created. And so if you're kind of looking at different culturally based models, that's a really awesome one out of Hawaii. So I have the pleasure of handing this over to Sarah to talk specifically about the siblings legislation. Yes?
Should we transition?
Yes.
Got too many things to hold, thanks.
Give us a second.
Transition. Okay, actually. Whoops. I think I got it. Oh, no. I have a pocket. Okay, yep. Okay, I'm done with that. Hello again. It's great to see everybody again after lunch. And I just want to start by saying it's been a lot of fun to partner with Jessica on our little statewide tour, talking about fostering connections. I've learned so much more about what the foundation's doing and the great work that they're doing with the Project Everlast. So it's been a real honor and treat for me. As Jessica said, I'm going to be talking in the second half about the sibling provisions of Fostering Connections Act, the Meridian H case that came down this spring from the Nebraska Supreme Court, and then the provisions in the state bill LB 177 related to siblings. Okay, so I wanted to start out just giving some context. This is the department's data from a point in time this summer, I think, showing that statewide approximately 60% of all siblings are placed together and approximately 78 are placed with at least one sibling. So it's not bad. In your handouts, in your packets, you have a handout that it is, again, the department's data by service area. And then it also, I think, splits it out by like number of siblings, because it's obviously harder to place a strip of 5 or 6 kids together, so it kind of shows the data by numbers of siblings. I can let you know that in the eastern service area and the southeast service area, you guys are just slightly below the statewide average. The eastern service area, approximately 57% of all siblings are placed together, and approximately 78% are placed with at least one sibling. And in the southeast service area, 55% of all siblings are placed together, and 74% are placed with at least one sibling. So that's kind of interesting, because as we were going around and I was giving that data for the other service areas, they were above average, and I was mentioning that, and I kept thinking maybe this is wrong because everybody's above average, but it looks like a little bit below here in this part of the state, and there may be regional reasons for that, but a little bit of healthy competition is good. So that's kind of the context of where things are, according to that data. And then we should have taken this out. I wanted to have cool graphics like Jessica, so I asked if she'd share this with us. And then we were looking at that, and it didn't seem to go with what I just told you. And we found out the reason why is this is from the permanency sub, and so this is data for kids 14 and older in terms of their sibling placement. So you can look at how that looks. Okay, and then just some benefits of placing siblings together. There's a lot of research out there on this. This comes from a great resource from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, ACF. Placing kids with together with their siblings, among other things, they're not burdened with wondering where their siblings are, whether or not they are safe. They can provide natural sense of support to one another, help them maintain a positive sense of their identity and knowledge of their cultural and familial histories, and then has the potential to offer significant support for them throughout the course of their lives. Okay, this is the language, the sibling placement provision in its entirety of the Federal Fostering Connections Act, and you can see that it requires the state to make reasonable efforts to place siblings removed from their home in the same foster care, kinship, guardianship, or adoptive placement unless the state documents that such joint placement would be contrary to the safety or well-being of any of the siblings. And then when joint placement is not possible, to make reasonable efforts to provide frequent visitation or other ongoing interaction, again, unless the state documents that doing so would be contrary to the safety or well-being of any of the siblings. What's that? Oh, that'd be great. She's gonna click for me. Great, click. You can actually click all the way through. Thanks. That's handy. All right, so we have been all over the state, so sorry if we're a little bit punchy this afternoon. Okay, so this case, as I mentioned, Nebraska Appleseed filed an amicus brief. And so, I invite, again, other folks who were involved in the case, if they want to jump in and share anything, I would welcome that. But just to give a little bit of background, this case involved a mother who had relinquished custody of 2 children in the state of Minnesota, and those children were adopted in Minnesota. The mother subsequently gave birth to Meridian and moved to the state of Nebraska. The child was removed from the mother's custody following an incident in which, a DUI incident in which the child was in the vehicle, and Meridian was placed in foster care in the state of Nebraska. The older siblings, by and through their adoptive parents in the state of Minnesota, filed a motion to intervene, and that motion was granted. The maternal grandparents, who also intervened in the case, the maternal grandparents also resided in Minnesota and had some ongoing contact with the siblings and some of the extended family there. The children had never resided together previously, although they had had a number of visits over a period of time. And originally, the department was in support of the placement change, but over time and following a second evaluation, the department changed their position, and eventually the juvenile court denied the motion to change placement. Sorry, I don't know if I mentioned, obviously, the siblings intervened, and then the siblings, again, by and through their adoptive parents, filed a motion to change placement of the child from her foster home in Nebraska to reside with the siblings and their adoptive parents in Minnesota. Again, the juvenile court denied the motion to change placement, and the siblings appealed. And on a motion to bypass the Nebraska Supreme Court, the Supreme Court held that the siblings did not have standing. And again, standing is the requirement that a litigant have a personal stake in the outcome of a controversy in order to warrant the court's jurisdiction. And so in analyzing the standing issue, the Supreme Court went through a number of rights that the siblings had alleged that they ultimately determined didn't give rise to standing. So I just want to walk through those. The Supreme Court determined that the siblings did not have standing to appeal under state law or common law, and that in order, they looked first at the statute in Chapter 43 about who has standing to appeal. It does not specifically list siblings in this situation, then looked to see whether there might be common law standing, and ultimately determined that in order to establish a common law right to appeal, one would need to demonstrate a personal stake in the controversy, and the court has never recognized a right on the part of an unadjudicated sibling to establish or preserve a sibling relationship in abuse or neglect proceedings. The Supreme Court noted that the siblings had no interest in a sibling relationship that was separate or distinct from that of Meridian, and therefore the unadjudicated siblings did not have standing to rest their claims on that of another party. There was also raised whether the siblings had a quasi or constitutional liberty interest in their relationship with one another. The Nebraska Supreme Court determined that the siblings in this case did not have a constitutionally protected liberty interest in their relationship post-termination relinquishment, and where the children had not resided together previously. And then finally, the court also looked at the Fostering Connections Act, and this case did get a little bit of national attention because I think it was one of the first cases to interpret this provision, particularly with this posture nationally. And so in looking at the Fostering Connections Act, they also determined that there was no legal interest in the Fostering Connections Act sufficient to give rise to standing. And the Supreme Court read the Fostering Connections Act to place responsibilities on the state with regard to a child it has removed from the custody of its parent, but is silent as to minor siblings of the child who are not in foster care. So the Supreme Court dismissed the appeal for lack of standing and also dismissed the grandparents' appeal, holding that any interest they had in the proceeding by virtue of their biological relationship was extinguished at the time of the mother's termination of parental rights. Great, so I just wanted to mention a few, and you can click one more time if you don't mind. Oops, there. Thanks. I want to mention a few practical implications of the Meridian case. I think the first is that the factual scenario in the Meridian case was, kind of unique in that it was post-termination relinquishment adoption and siblings who had not resided together previously. And also, I think another sort of interesting take-home is that, going forward, I think the interest in the sibling relationship is best raised from the perspective of the guardian ad litem, when the guardian ad litem thinks that that's not contrary to the child's safety or well-being, because there was a lot of focus in the Supreme Court case about this being from the perspective of the unadjudicated child. And I also wanted to mention, it's not on there, but we've talked about in some of the other presentations, that I think another important implication, and just best practice generally, is to try to get placement and visitation in place when that's not contrary to the safety or well-being of the siblings, in place as soon as you can in a case. Otherwise, things become more difficult down the road. So. Any questions or comments?
So the adopted or the grandparents didn't appeal this decision farther up? That was it? Just the Nebraska Supreme Court?
No, there. I don't know. Is it?
No idea.
No, there has not been a petition for further review filed, if that's what you're asking, and we were just discussing that I think that the time has expired for that. So.
I mean, I think they're completely wrong, and I'd be happy to tell them that. In that, what they're saying is that the termination of the mother's relationship then terminates the brothers and sisters. That is ridiculous. How can, constitutionally, how can one person terminate another person's constitutional right? Whether it's to association, whether it's to family, they're wrong. They're wrong on this. It's terrible that they believe that. How will those children ever have a relationship if they're never allowed an opportunity? And so that little girl will never know her siblings in a way that, if we're really talking about family values and keeping family together, this is just wrong.
Well, I appreciate your perspective. These are tough cases, and one thing that I've said, and I think there is previous case law on the grandparent issue, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess I will say these are tough cases. There are, you know, as I think I've shared this almost at every presentation we've done, but the one thing I find hard about child welfare cases is that there are a lot of factors to be considered. And
the reality is, it is supposed to be about the child. And unfortunately, this case is very reflective that the children's interests were not considered. It just went to the adult, and that's very unfortunate. As I was saying, I think even from the perspective of the child, there are competing concerns, and, you know, and to be fair, in this case, early on, they were attempting reunification with a mom who was in Nebraska, and they wanted to keep the child here in order to do that. I don't know if this is still working. Is it not working? Okay, then I won't hold it. I'll just try to speak up. And so, you know, there's a lot of things to be considered. Obviously, you know, we had a perspective on this case, but we certainly recognize that, you know, you're looking at reunification and school stability and siblings and all those things. But at the end of the day, and I want to talk about LB 177, which I think adds a little bit to the analysis. But at the end of the day, you know, I think that the important thing to remember is that this requires reasonable efforts to try to place siblings together when placement isn't possible, to establish, again, either visitation or other ongoing interaction, which could mean a number of different things, unless the state documents that it would be contrary to the safety or well-being. So, but I appreciate your comments. Okay, can I just put this? You want to try? Well, I'll keep talking. I can click now, maybe. Thank you. Okay. So thanks. So this is the LB 177. Can you guys hear me in the back? Just raise your hand if I bring it down. Thanks, Robbie. This is the language of the state bill, which differs a little bit from the federal law. I guess I would characterize those differences as the state law, similar to the transition plan piece, provides a little bit more detail, and also court oversight. And so this is similar. Reasonable effort shall be made to place a child with the child's siblings in the same foster care placement or adoptive placement unless placement is contrary to the safety or well-being. This requirement applies even if the custody orders of the siblings are made at separate times. This also requires that the department provide the siblings and the court with the reasons why joint placement would be contrary to the safety or well-being of any of the siblings if that determination is made. And then I kind of bolded the wrong thing, but this is, I guess, the point that I wanted to make is that there's language that the court shall determine the type and frequency of sibling visitation or other ongoing interaction to be implemented by the department, which I presume that would happen anyway, but it's in there in the statute. And also that the court shall periodically review and evaluate the effectiveness and appropriateness of joint sibling placement. Also requires that information regarding the court-authorized or ordered visitation, placement, or other ongoing interaction shall be provided to the foster parent, relative caretaker, guardian, prospective adoptive parent, and child, and also the parent unless there's been a termination or the court determines it's contrary to safety or well-being. So everybody has information about what the authorized or ordered interaction is. And then this is some different language also. If there has been a termination ordered, the language is that the department shall make reasonable efforts to make joint placement or do all of the following to facilitate frequent visitation or other ongoing interaction between the siblings when a child is adopted or enters into permanent placement, to including the training to prospective adoptive parents, information about the importance of sibling relationships and counseling methods for maintaining sibling relationships, provide prospective adoptive parents with information regarding the child's siblings, and encourage prospective adoptive parents to make a plan for facilitating post-adoption contact between the child and the child's siblings. Also provides that parties to the case may file a motion for joint sibling placement, visitation, or other ongoing interaction. And so that's, I think, helpful for folks to remember. If it's not happening, then parties may file a motion to get that going.
And then the definition of siblings under the state law is a little bit broader. It includes biological siblings and legal siblings, including but not limited to half siblings and step siblings. And then there's also language that this shall include the child's siblings, even if the child has not resided with the siblings prior to placement in foster care. Great, and so then I just want to mention a couple of practical implications of the state legislation. Again, I think I've said a couple times now, the provisions are a little bit more comprehensive and a little bit more detailed, and then also require reasonable efforts to be made with a broad range of siblings to really make reasonable efforts to see if there are siblings and that if placement or visitation or other ongoing interaction with them, could be in the best interest of the child or rather not contrary to their safety or well-being. Are there any questions on the state legislation? Oh, yeah.
This legislation doesn't provide anything about jurisdiction over other parties such as step-parents, the other parent of that half-sibling that you want to foster sibling contact with, and the step-parent is refusing any contact?
No, it does not address that issue. Oh, thank you.
Should be working now.
Thank you, though. Any other questions on the state or on any of it? Okay, then if we have a couple more minutes, and we do, I want to invite my partner Jessica back up. I think the best part of our little afternoon session is the tidbits that Jessica gives about what they are hearing from. It was all fantastic, but it's so helpful to hear what the youth are saying about their experiences. And on sibling placement, this is one thing that they do hear from the young people, is that these relationships with their siblings are really important to them. And so I'll just let Jessica talk about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and most of you who have been a part of presentations done by Project Everlast members hear very regularly from the young people that the sibling relationship is incredibly, I'm supposed to talk into both of these, but is incredibly significant and important to them. And for all of the reasons that Sarah has mentioned. And we just kind of share a little bit more about some of the things that the youth are talking about right now. One is the visitation with siblings. A lot of times visitation is happening with parents, and then that's when they get to see their siblings, and how important it is for them to, one, not only have visitation with their siblings that's quality, but that's natural. And I can just speak for myself. I only got to see my brothers when I had visits with my biological mom, and there she was trying to, prove herself, and we were trying to work on our relationship. So the relationship with my siblings wasn't, we didn't get to build anything there. But the other piece of it is we were in a very small town, and our visitation was done at a police station, and so there was no, other than we could find ourselves getting into a little trouble, there was no way for us to really build memories or the kind of natural relationships that siblings build with each other. And so the young people are, recommending right now, help us to figure out either to live in the same community, if we can, go to the same school so we can have those kind of memories, or if we can't, how do we go to each other's sporting events or to whatever they're interested in school, so I can know who they're dating, and I can know more of who they are as a person than just conversations during a visitation. And so that if they can't live together, and how important it is that they live together, but if they can't, how important the visits and how we think of those natural visits, how important those are. The other piece, there are three pieces, so I'll be done soon. But the other piece that young people, and Vicki made sure that I address this, because she had heard this from a young person, and I think it's critical, is that oftentimes when siblings are taken away from their parents, there's a lot of relationship issues, and there's a lot of chaos going on in that family. And there can be blaming, and there can be things between siblings where they're trying to choose sides, and they're trying to deal with a lot of that. And sometimes the recommendation from the siblings will be, I don't want to live with my brother because he likes my mom, or I don't want to live with my sister because she's siding with dad, or she doesn't want to live in a new home, those kind of things. And so siblings aren't being placed together because they might be saying that those relationships, there's some tension there in the relationships. But how are we really talking with those siblings and helping them to deal with those things and to see how they can build their relationships instead of just placing them separate? I know one young person that was the case, and she was placed separately from her siblings. And she wishes that somebody would just help them deal with their issues between them, not with mom and dad necessarily, but between the two of them, so that they could have lived together and had a relationship, because they don't anymore. And that at that age, she shouldn't have been able to make, she didn't have what it took to make that choice to not live with her siblings or understand the depth of that decision she was making. And then the last thing that we are really excited about this legislation is the definition and the broadening of the definition of siblings. We have Camp Ketchup, and if you don't know about Camp Ketchup, just ask me. Or a lot of people in here are involved in Camp Ketchup, but it's phenomenal. And quite a few years ago, I had a call from a young woman, and she said, I don't really know my biological siblings, but I'd love to come to camp because I was in an adoptive placement with some siblings, and we don't get to live together anymore. That placement had been changed. But they're my siblings. And so thinking about who these young people consider their siblings is incredibly important. And young people who've been in placements for a really long time consider them just as much their siblings. I know to this day, my foster sisters, they are my sisters. No foster in front of it. They are who I do holidays with, and they are who I will for the rest of my life. And so really broadening how we look at siblings and who do these young people define as their siblings is incredibly important for their lifelong support. So I think those were all of the pieces that I wanted to touch on. Unless others have questions about anything around siblings. Yay, we did awesome, right?